How are
I'm watching the
you
chat,
doing?
everybody.
How are you doing
Capitalism,
today,
let's
probably,
go.
Tim? Uh-oh. I've got my own chat, okay? They're very
Yeah.
anti.
I'm doing all right. It's been so weird with the coronavirus. Like, I was concerned that I might have had it like a month or I can't even tell you how long ago it was. Like a month or so ago, I was concerned that I might have had it. So I was like, you know what? This is before any stay at home order. So I was like, I'm gonna stay at home. I probably don't have it, but I just want to be safe in case I have it. I don't want to give it to anyone else. So I stayed at home for like 2 or 3 weeks. I was like going out of my mind. And I was like, all right, I'm about ready to go out. And then we got the order to stay at home. So I've basically been inside, apart from taking my dog out for about like 7, 8 weeks. I don't know now. And I'm starting to go insane, man. I think I'm actually insane. So
That cabin fever hits hard. The coronavirus hasn't affected my life at all, so I'm doing pretty okay. Life of a streamer. Not exactly the most active, outdoor, adventurous sort.
Right. The biggest thing that's been killing me is just like honestly, with literally everything I had like going on is just like stopped. Apart from like internet shit, like so like I'm just at home and like fucking twiddling my thumbs. Oh, excuse me. I probably shouldn't cuss on this. I don't know. But yeah.
We don't mind if you cuss. You don't need to worry about that.
Adam, do you crowd doesn't mind, right?
Does my audience mind cursing?
I assume not.
Fuck no.
Okay.
They better
All
not. I mean, I believe in appropriate and professional use of strong language.
Yeah,
There's
you're
definitely
speaking.
a
You're
room for every
speaking to the
word.
man who protested the what was it? The Minnesotan law, which imposed a $20 fine on anyone who cursed in public. This man has taken a principled stance in favor of your God-given right to say curse words.
And dancing in public too. I think that's a pretty big First Amendment issue, especially since we did it at the Jefferson Monument.
Oh yeah, dancing's important.
I never thought I'd be famous for dancing, but it's like, oh yeah, you're that guy from that video. Okay.
I saw that video. You should not be famous for dancing.
Exactly.
All right, guys. Well, I
dance like a rugby player.
Yes, that is accurate.
Powerfully and to the amazement of all of the Stacys within eyeshot. Yeah. No, it's good. All right, let's hit it off. Tim, take us away.
All right, so guys, of course, I'm excited for this debate. My hope for this was to be more of a very rough kind of freeform thing. As a moderator here, for the most part, I think my main job is just getting you guys together. And at any point if I step in, it's basically going to be to try to ask a guiding question, just if I think this might be some way more productive. If you guys want to stay on whatever line you're on, just say so, and I'll shut up. And also just like kind of, I don't think it's gonna be an issue with stability. Both of you guys have been on here multiple times. You guys have been great. And really, the only thing I can imagine is, I guess, time fairness. Like so, but I mean, just you guys, try to be respectful. Like let the other person have a don't go on too long. Let them have a something that they can actually respond to. And really, ideally, the way I'm envisioning this is that I'll shut up and you guys can go at it for about 2 hours. Does that sound good for you guys?
Yeah, man, sounds great.
I'm sure we can fill the void just fine. I conducted myself civilly with Stefan Molyneux, so I'm pretty sure I can handle myself with just about everyone.
Yes, that was very well done. So, yeah, for anyone just hopping in here, the topic of debate here is the morality of capitalism. Don't want to put words in either of your mouths, but I am pretty sure that Adam believes that capitalism itself is a moral system, and that Vaush believes it is not. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I think that capitalism is preferable to certain other economic systems, but I do believe that at this point there are clear and obvious alternatives that would be more moral.
Okay. Just for clarity here, I'm not trying to like pin you in or anything like this. Like, but you would say that capitalism is immoral, right? Not just like there's a better option, but it is itself immoral. Correct?
I I try to avoid using really like hard binary language like that because everything is relative to something else, you know. Even like for example, like a shitty parent is probably preferable to living on the street. I would say that at this point in time, the decision to stick with capitalism is an immoral one. Because there are obvious ways in which we can improve on that system to deliver a better outcome.
Okay.
May I take a stab at an opening statement of definitions?
Yeah.
Okay, so I am first and foremost a voluntarist. I believe then that all human relations should be voluntary, free of force, fraud, and coercion. This is the foundation of libertarian ethics. And this is what I would define as a concept of morality, a unified theory of ethics based on the idea that as an independent consciousness in your own physical vessel, you own yourself, and therefore it is wrong to initiate force against you through force or fraud or aggression or violence or coercion or anything of that nature that deprives you of the rights incumbent with that self-ownership. And the definition of capitalism that I would use here is basically concurrent with that, because the definition of capitalism from a textbook is an economic system based on ownership of the means of production. And this gets generally misrepresented by misdefining the means of production with a focus on industrial resources as opposed to the ultimate means of production, which is the individual human being, the individual mind and body capable of creating value that is measured not in widgets or in dollars, but in human happiness and quality of life. And so within this framework, where I would say that capitalism is this overarching system, which is the only ethical system, that anything, capitalism, as I'm defining it here, describes a state of ethics. If a society is unethical, it means that someone's rights are being violated, which means their self-ownership is being violated, which means that a proper capitalist system of full ownership of the means of production is not being respected. So within that framework of voluntarism as capitalism, you could have a system that looks like something else. You could, and I use this in my messaging even now, running for president on the localization platform of dissolving the federal government, that if you want, and I go to the extremes with this, so forgive the little sidebar here, but if you're for me as someone of Jewish descent, Jews will not replace us is viscerally disturbing. But if there are people in this country who want an ethno-state and they form it on private property voluntarily, they don't hold anybody captive and they don't force it on anybody else, as disgusting as I think that is, I want them to have that right. This is the modern equivalent of, I disagree with what you have to say, but I will fight for to the death for your right to say it. And on the flip side, if you're a gun-grabbing socialist who wants to live in a nudist commune in the woods, as long as you're not forcing it on anybody else, I want you to have that right too. I wouldn't live in either place. And if you say, well, we're forming it voluntarily, but we're going to call it socialism, my take on that is like, well, if you're doing it ethically, if you're doing it with respect for self-ownership, technically that falls under my definition of capitalism. But if you want to call that socialism, that's fine. And I would say that anything that violates that ethical premise is what we're going to be debating today.
Excuse me. Yeah, so I'll try to address as much of that as I can with, I guess, my own opening statement. So, surprise, surprise, I'm a libertarian too. a libertarian socialist. Libertarianism's ideological roots can be found largely in the product of leftist thinkers, after all, because it was leftists who originally concerned themselves with the idea of human emancipation. I place a very high priority on human liberty, the ability for people to act independent of coercion, with full autonomy, to prevent them from being stymied or withheld by institutions more powerful than them. I do think that on a fundamental level, human beings are all equal. I mean, sure, we vary in individual ways, but in a principal moral sense, we are all equal. And I look upon systems which divide and place into hierarchies human beings with great suspicion. I believe that capitalism is such a system. I think that capitalism, by way of its internal economic mechanisms, effectively necessitates a hierarchy that exists between those who own the means of production and those who do not. There are other smaller, less consequential hierarchies, the difference, for example, between a poor man and a rich man, but in the most egregious one of all is without a doubt the difference between those who control your labor and those who must sell their labor to survive. That's the issue that I take primarily. I don't like framing self-ownership in literal terms. For example, I wouldn't be comfortable with the idea of a human being selling themselves into slavery. If you own yourself, it follows logically that you can do anything with yourself if you want. It's your property. And you can, if you want, sell a piece of your property to another person without any expectation of getting it back. But I think there's something different about a human being, about consciousness, and about self-actualization, that means ownership can't really apply consequentially to what we describe as sort of a human experience. So ultimately, my contention would be this: a person who believes in freedom, a person who believes in egalitarianism, a person who believes in the right for human beings to operate independent of outside external forces influencing their life, often to a negative extent, these people should believe in socialism, because only through socialism can we destroy the class divide that imposes that hierarchy upon us.
Oh man, I don't know where to start there.
All
But
right, we
now
got
we
all
can
the
get
time in the world.
into we can get into this being a matter of market preferences and definitions. But I think what I want to get at first then is your definition of capitalism, because I
Mhm.
think you skipped that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I define capitalism, I think I use a pretty standard definition, as an economic system where individuals have the legal right to own property and produce capital as they would. It doesn't have to come from like the patrician of a state. And what's more, that property rights are defended by the state to ensure the ability for the individual to control private property. That's what I consider to be capitalism. Of course, there are different types. Mercantile capitalism existed before the Industrial Revolution, and that was
Well,
mostly done.
hold on. As a libertarian who understands the connection of voluntarism and anarchism, wouldn't you consider the existence of the state a violation of capitalism? That if there is a monopoly on even property protection services, that you don't have a market in that area, and so it's at least partially occluded capitalism when you have a state enforcing property rights, which is not what I would advocate for, and something I would say would be unethical because that state represents a coercive monopoly.
Well, 2 points to that. For one, no, capitalism requires a state because only a central authority can defend property rights. After all, if we didn't
Okay,
have a
hold
state
on. No,
determine.
that's okay. See
Well,
that.
wait, wait,
So
wait.
that
Second,
I gotta
second
take
point
issue
as
with that.
well.
But go ahead.
Wait, wait. It's okay. You write it down. I just want to say the second thing as
Yeah,
well. And
I can
secondly,
take notes.
even if that was the case, that the absence of a state bolstered capitalism, which I don't believe to be the case, I would say the abolition of the state in our society. I am an anarchist. I don't like states, but the abolition of our state in the society in which we exist now would not bring about positive outcomes. It would be highly destructive.
Okay, you said that only a state can defend property rights. And I think that just flies in the face of observable reality where individuals defend property rights by assertion, by consensus, by mutual respect, by social standards, and by private physical defense, as we would describe it today, in so many ways that are actually more effective than government. I mean, why do you not go around stealing stuff, even as someone who not you personally, but like why would someone who might be tempted by desperation or greed or whatever to go around and steal stuff, not do it. Government is not an effective deterrent on any kind of large scale to prevent that theft. And government itself is, I think you would agree, largely and I would say by definition, a mechanism of theft. So why would you say that if defending property rights is a virtuous thing, as I would if you include in that certainly self-ownership and civil rights, then why would you want the state to have the monopoly, or why would you say that the state is the best mechanism of achieving that?
So a few points there. I don't like framing the idea that what the government does is theft, because theft is fundamentally a legal definition. By definition, like stuff like taxation cannot be theft, because
Okay,
theft
so what do you
is
call it
something we just
then?
described. Oh, it's a system of wealth expropriation, but theft is a specific legal definition. I think it's a little bit reductive to describe any time any resource changes hand from one group to another as a form of theft. But with regards
No, but
to
if it changes coercively, if it's taken, so you said it's appropriation, then what would be your umbrella term? Because I think most libertarians say theft includes robbery and fraud and appropriation and extortion. That all of those things are under the umbrella term theft. What's your umbrella term?
well, we do consent to being taxed. There are things that we can do if we don't want to be taxed, but I would use the term appropriation, generally speaking.
I don't think you consent to be taxed if, in the exercise of your natural rights, something is taken from you.
Yeah, you do. You could just leave the country.
Oh, so I can't, or secede? Am I allowed to? I mean, I know under your world I'd be allowed to secede, right?
Well, there wouldn't be a state in my world, so I mean, I don't know if there'd be anything to secede from, but I mean, if you want, you can leave the country, or if you really want, you don't get taxed if you don't have an income. If you want, you can just live off welfare. You don't have to do anything that gets you taxed by the government.
I think if you have a right to do something, and there is someone saying you can't do that without giving us money, your rights are being held hostage, and that would be a form of, I don't know if you want to say your legal definition, but certainly an umbrella term of theft.
So you're arguing that if there are basic things we should have access to, but if they're like kind of paywalled, or we have to like lose money or resources to get to them, it's unethical?
I didn't follow all those definitions, but I think yes.
Well,
Like if I have a right to trade with my neighbor, and the government says, well, or I have a right to start a business and sell something that I've produced, and the government says, well, you can do that, but you have to give us 10% of your profit, then my right is being violated. That something that I am entitled to as the fruit of my labor is being stolen from me.
okay, then this is something that we can completely agree on, because right now, in order to live a decent life, every person in this country has to work at a job, and that job expropriates labor from them through their surplus value. That's how companies make profit. So I agree. Fundamentally, capitalism is unethical.
You just said people could live on welfare.
Well, people can live on welfare. So if you take contention with my argument, you also have to take contention with the mechanisms of capitalism. In both cases,
Well,
people can, if they want, just live some subsistence lifestyle, but the higher order pleasures of life are gated behind a higher power, a corporation or a state, expropriating from you.
So you are defining capitalism as state capitalism, and I'm defining capitalism as an anarcho-capitalist or a voluntarist would define capitalism.
Nothing that I've described wouldn't also apply in your ideal world.
Well, in my ideal world, there would be no coercive or government-based mechanisms of property rights enforcements, and it
What about
largely wouldn't be necessary.
What about corporate elements?
So, but here's where we are looking at the same problem. To your immediate question, corporate elements. What you say about you have to work a job where your labor is expropriated in order to maintain a decent quality of life. I mean, first of all, in the sense that you say you can opt out with welfare, certainly that's one way where you just blew a hole in your own argument. But then, for myself, for example,
how am I blowing a hole in my own argument?
We said you have to work to have a decent living, whereas just a minute before that, you said you could opt out and live off welfare.
No, I'm sorry. Let me clarify. My argument demolishes your idea. You're making the argument that it's unethical for the government to tax you, even though you could avoid those taxes by living a subsistence lifestyle. I'm saying the exact same thing for corporations. Corporations expropriate your labor, and the only way to not live a subsistence lifestyle is to work for said corporation. In both cases, a higher power, a corporation or a state, gatekeeps the pleasures of life behind your subservience to them. In either case, you're being cucked by something infinitely more powerful than you. No individual can stand up to a state, no individual can stand up to a corporation. But in both instances, it is through their exploitation that you are able to access many of the higher pleasures of life. That's the case whether or not a state is backing up the private property rights of a capitalist society or not.
Here we get to the crux of things then, because I would say this is a byproduct of the state being a coercive managerial agent in the economy. That corporatism that you describe, that our inability to compete as individuals, to have our labor as contribution to the economy properly valued, is an obvious product of the corporatism that we are living under today, where corporations have special powers, where individuals are disadvantaged, where a small business is at a disadvantage to compete with a big business every time, where banking interests and loan mechanisms create consolidations of wealth and power that are completely unnatural, and that in a flattened capitalist market without this gross concentration of wealth and power that is primarily centered around the phenomena of central banks, obviously backed up by government policy and coercion and tax systems and all of that, you would have the ability to compete and to, as an individual, have your labor properly valued such that all of the problems you're pointing at with the current system go away.
This is the same fairy tale that I have told to me by every libertarian, that somehow the state is like making everything
You're
worse.
a libertarian.
And if we just took away the state. I'm a libertarian socialist. I recognize capitalism is also oppressive. You take a look at one hierarchy and say you don't like it, and then take a look at another one and say you actually quite do like it.
Because state capitalism creates unnatural hierarchies. Your definition, your concept of capitalism does that. What I'm defining capitalism as doesn't do that at all.
Yeah, but again, this has never been tested empirically, and there is no theory backing this up. Why exactly, in a world without a state that still has a capitalist society, would people suddenly be free from all of the implicit coercion inherent to a capitalist society? How exactly? And we didn't even get to this. How exactly?
Because there is no coercion.
Property rights without a state. No, there is coercion because you still have to work to survive. Unless you're saying there's a robust UBI and no incentive whatsoever to work in an ANCAP state or ANCAP society.
No, of course you would not have a UBI.
Right, then you have to work, and in order to work and survive, you have to submit yourself to the will of an autocratic organization. Businesses are not democracies. You work there, and you
not necessarily true. No, that's not necessarily true, because in a world where there is no state-granted property right or corporatist or policy or banking system-based advantages, your labor as an individual is valued equally to everybody else's. That's part of the problem of the distortion of the current system, where you as an independent contractor can compete without being part of a bigger system. You can
help me out.
Engage in barter, you can engage in trade for goods and services.
Every time
you can live off the land and create your own business, like what I'm doing right now. Even
just create your own business, and then other people have to work for that business. Every time I talk to an ANCAP, like they fall back on the same fairy tale about how, like, if we just got rid of the same fundamental principles of societal governance that have been working for thousands of years, suddenly everything will fall into place. Explain this to me.
Nobody else has. Hold on. No one else.
I want this explained to me individually.
No. I have to examine one of your premises here. No one else has to work for me. I have a shop in a shipping container where I can make geodesic dome frames. So I can send them to people, and I can have a one-man business, and I can live very well if I want like that.
So everybody just
my labor directly. The problem is that if I want to enjoy the synergistic extra value of coming together with other people, whether it's through, in a sense with my business I already am. Like I get raw material, I get conduit from hardware stores and nuts and bolts through a mail order, and I put those components together and I create a product that's a geodesic dome frame that I can sell on the internet.
So wait, let's take that. Wait. Let's take this from a base level, okay? So, on a fundamental level, in a capitalist society, you need to work to survive. Let's take the life of an average person, okay? Let's say you're born into a sort of well-off family, or let's just say middle class.
Well, hold on a second. Hold on.
Wait. I have to
Is
lay out
work to
premises
survive
before we
not a
can even
product of
discuss
nature?
this. What?
Right. When you say have to work, do you mean have to work for someone else, or how would you extend this to like hunter-gatherer societies? Would you say
Your labor
you
has
have to
to be
work
sold.
to survive?
You have, in order to make money, you have to sell your labor. Whether or not you have your own business or you're working for somebody else's, you have to sell your own labor, unless you own the labor of other people.
Would you guys mind if I jumped in real quick? So I know where you're going with this, Vaush, and I just want to direct this in a way that I think might help make things more clear with the arguments here. Vaush, like I think you touched on this loosely, but maybe you could do it more directly. Could you describe how you define coercion, and then how the capitalist system is implicitly coercive? I think that would help us get where we're. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, of course. Capitalism is implicitly. Well, I haven't even gotten to like the broader problems with capitalism because we're still focused on like the definition of coercion. But coercion is any instance in which an individual is compelled to act in a certain way due to forces that in some way like leverage like stakes over them. So, for example, in a capitalist society, you do have to work or you have to own labor in order for you to be able to make money. And money is the tool that you use to live a fulfilling life. It's very difficult to live a fulfilling life with no money whatsoever. You could be Diogenes and jerk off in a barrel on the street all you want, but the cops are eventually going to show up and take you away. Money is kind of the baseline for existence in a capitalist society. The majority of people in this country right now are born into a certain economic class, and then they die in that same economic class. There's not a tremendous amount of class mobility. And what I'm curious about is how exactly this would change in a society without a state. Because, and this is what bothers me when I talk about this, it seems fantastical. There isn't any theory or any pragmatic demonstration of a state's removal serving to the benefit of the humans in that area. Well, usually when states fail and stop exerting law over their citizenry, we call that a failed state, and they're usually in a state of perpetual civil war. These are usually not enviable conditions. What it seems to me in an anarcho-capitalist society is that we would return fundamentally to feudalism. We've seen this happen before during the competing shogunates back during the Japanese feudal era, where dozens of clans would just organize their own economic and military forces, and people who live in a given area are completely subservient to the lords that own their respective castles and fortifications. This isn't entirely dissimilar to what would happen in an anarcho-capitalist society, and I'm really, really curious what mechanisms make capitalism less coercive without a state acting as an intermediary force between you and businesses.
So I'm shocked to hear your commitment to money and materialism, because I don't live an ascetic lifestyle, but I really do disagree with your focus on money and materialism.
This is
the
a
heart
pivot.
of this.
We're not addressing the question.
No. I'm going to get to it though, but to me, it's ethics is more of a primary nature here. And when you say there's never been an incidence of removing the state, we could make analogies about cancer and say there's never been an evidence, of cancer being good for a human body. And this would be, a better way of looking at government, to say that the introduction of coercion takes us away from this ideal state of creation of value, and everything that you're saying that is, an ill of capitalism. It really comes down to this difference in definitions, where you define capitalism as this thing that is backed up by the state. And I really want to go back to this premise where
Every
you say
criticism
that
I'm levying continues to exist with no state.
Every criticism, what?
Every criticism I'm levying here continues to exist in the society you're proposing without a state. That's what I'm asking you. Why would the absence of a state make capitalism less coercive?
Because capitalism is by definition not coercive in the way that I am defining it.
That's
Removal of the
that's not
state would be
wait,
the
you
removal
can't
of
just
coercion.
definition your way out of that question. If a
No,
person right
this is
now,
but this is it. But this is it. No, this is again the heart of our difference of definitions is that I am
this
saying
isn't a definitional
capitalist
difference.
system.
You're not answering the question.
Well, no, because I'm including in my definition of capitalism that you own yourself, that the ownership of a human being
That's irrelevant.
is to be respected.
This is the tautological circle talking that libertarians engage in to avoid dealing with the real world repercussions of their arguments. So let's talk about it. Right now, in our society, which is market oriented, if you don't like using the term capitalist, there are exploitative forces on the average person. They have to do certain things or they don't get to enjoy a certain quality of life. They're forced into doing some things. How would this change in an ANCAP society?
That's life. You have to do stuff to get stuff.
So your argument is that
Like,
there is just going to be exploitation no matter what? You're not saying it wouldn't
no,
be
not no,
exploitative?
no. Hold, oh no. See, now you're changing the question. You didn't use the word. The way you phrased it was not with the word exploitation. You said that you're going to have to work. No, you said you're going to have to work to enjoy a quality of life. Yeah, that's how life works.
Okay,
sure,
I think wait. So you have to pay
welfare. Hold on, and there's rent
to enjoy
seeking,
quality of
but
life.
rent seeking is a product of government. Being able to work or being able to get value without putting in effort or value is a product of is this rent seeking concept that is a product of statism. That is the perversion
then taxes are just
ideal
a part of life.
capitalism.
If you want there to be basic necessities that everyone can enjoy, taxes are just a part of life. You need to fund those somehow. They get taken if you decide to work.
But there's a better way. Yeah, but there's a better way than that. Like we can have a voluntary system that achieves the same things without all those perversions.
That system not impose coercive measures on the workers of its society?
Wait, I'm saying a voluntary system. If it's voluntary, where's the coercion? Like, are you implying some other definition of coercion here?
Let me ask you a basic question, okay? Let's say that you are on a plane and that plane crash lands on an island, okay? There are only a few survivors. In fact, there are only two. And you wake up after the first one does. By the time that you have woken up, the other survivor in this plane has claimed all of the coconuts on all of the coconut trees, stacked them on their pile, sheltered that pile with all the wreckage from the plane, and declared they own it. And they say that they would be willing to give you said coconuts if you throat their cock. Now, would you consider that to be a voluntary interaction? Is that a voluntary interaction?
Okay, so no, I'm actually people. No, Vaush, thank you for that. That's a great way of getting to the next fundamental, I think, misunderstanding here in terms of a definition of property rights. And I think
but you have to answer the question before you can move on.
I'm gonna get to the coconuts and the deep throating. Don't worry.
But it's yes, no. I just want to know the question answer, and then you can.
Would that be ethical? No, it would be unethical. It would be I'll say then, if the question is, would that be an ethical situation or would that be coercive?
Would it be voluntary?
Yes, it would be coercive. Well, it would be based on an illegitimate property rights claim, and this is really an essential thing that I'll grant you. A lot of libertarians do miss this.
So would it be voluntary? Would it be a voluntary exchange?
That would no, because it is an illegitimate claim to property rights, the same way that the state creates a territorial monopoly on authority.
What's a legitimate claim to property rights?
Mixing your labor with natural resources in the Lockean sense. If it is something that has your labor in it that you have claimed by homesteading or modifying with your labor. And here's the thing that most libertarians will miss. Hold on a second. I'm going to get to that. Because I think this is a really under-examined topic among libertarians, and I would hope that hearing my perspective on this might bring you back to an understanding of property rights that gives you more confidence in voluntarism. Right now, property outside of your body and even inside of your body, unfortunately, under our current government considering forced vaccinations, it is a matter of social consent, right? How much labor can you mix with the soil? How much is required for you to make it yours, right? And if I put up a fence around 1 million acres and say everything in here is mine because I put up a fence around it. I mixed my. You'd be like, no, bullshit. I don't think so. That's not. No, you can't just put up a fence around it and claim it. But here in northern Arizona, I bought 11 acres and I put up a fence around it and I'm using it. And generally speaking, society respects that as an illegitimate or as a legitimate individual claim to natural resources because I'm able to put it to use. I'm able to actually create value with this. But if it were to be abandoned, then it would go back into its unclaimed state. Now, one of the other things here about use of property, a lot of people ask libertarians, but who will build the roads? And the question, as you know, isn't so much who's actually going to build them, but how do we manage shared property? How do we manage infrastructure of a geographical nature? And here it's really simple. We have setbacks and easements, and you can't build all the way up to the edge of your property in a way that would impede your neighbor's access to their property. Now, here, this consensus of, hey, you don't build within 30 feet
we
of the
are
edge of
going
your property.
so far off. Wait, can we?
No. This gets to property rights. So when you I told you I was getting to the coconuts and the deep throating. Don't worry. So if this is my legitimate claim here, and I'm not using my property to limit another human being's right, and this is an inherent right that a lot of libertarians don't adequately consider, is that you have a right to equitable access to natural resources, to homestead unused property. And that being respected would mean that if two people are on an island, there is an incumbent right to equitable access, and one person can't say, I own the entire thing, and use that as an excuse to push the other person off the island.
All right. So do you then have an issue with the idea of owning multiple businesses because you can't possibly work at any one business at any given point in time?
I own multiple businesses. I own
Big Igloo Geodesics.
I own Big Igloo Geodesics, and I own Adam versus the Man, and I own the Freedom Line.
Okay.
Yes,
and
I work personally in all of them.
Do you think it's ethical for a businessman to own multiple businesses where they don't actually contribute to the labor of all or even any of those businesses? It was an investment.
In and of itself, no. But as we know that as an example in modern society, that is.
But you just said it's not legitimate evocation of property rights for somebody to lay claim to property that they don't personally use and contribute labor to.
No, they can also trade their legitimately acquired natural property. You can engage in exchange.
Wait, how is it legitimately acquired? They just bought it. So it's okay to just like buy huge tracts of land in businesses, even if you don't use it personally.
No, in the case of land, there needs to be in an anarcho-capitalist society or a true capitalist society, or even with a voluntary system of government or localization, there would be a standard of what is a respected claim to ownership. And if you're claiming land and simply using coercion to sequester it, that would be unethical. And that's generally how government today.
I don't know what you mean by like a legitimate acquisition.
Property.
I don't know what you mean by like a legitimate acquisition of property rights. Like, so on the island example.
Okay, so like I grow apples and you grow oranges.
In the island
I trade an apple for an orange. I legitimately acquired the orange.
Wait. Yes, I understand that libertarianism makes sense if you reduce it to Econ 101 questions, but I'm talking about how this would work in the real world. In the island example, that person, the person who collected all of the coconuts, used their labor to collect all of it. Are you saying stuff like land and food should be decommodified and should be equally accessible to the entire population?
No, I'm saying that we should allow the market to produce a natural consensus for what is a legitimate claim to property rights.
Wait, that's weaseling out of the question. You can't just appeal to consensus. What if the consensus of the market is fuck poor people? What if we just buy up all the property and rent it back to them at exorbitant rates, which is what currently happens? What if that's what the market like agrees upon in an ANCAP society?
Well, in a sense, what we're talking about could be, by that sense, all a product of the market, whatever the current paradigm is, whether it's through voluntary means or through government. If we consent or demand a government, that's what we're going to get. And yeah, what you're pointing at is exactly a product of the current paradigm. And it's because people generally don't care. I mean, a big part of what I'm advocating for is a greater respect for the individual human being, for that right to individual self-ownership. and that basic appeal to ethics, primarily of something that applies to every individual. And either way,
Wait,
both of
you're
us
not answering.
are
You're not
talking about
answering the
improving
question
the
again.
market.
You're not answering the question. So, are you saying that these goods, fundamental human necessities like food and housing and stuff, should this be decommodified, or are you just saying leave it to the market? Because again, then I ask you, what if the market decides it's more profitable to be incredibly exploitative and charge people money, which they can only make by making themselves subservient to another person's authority or by starting their own business in order for them to access
Right.
those goods?
Right. I'd say that's where we are now. But would you
No,
could you
no, what you
define
have to answer the
decommodified
question. You
then?
can't just keep saying every
Right.
bad
Right.
thing that
Hold on.
happens right
Hey.
now would
Hey.
be fixed
Hey.
if we had no state.
Could you? I'm in understanding your question. Can you explain how you're using the term decommodified?
Decommodify in the sense that it's not tied to market forces and everyone is guaranteed it, like a ration, basically.
In the sense that I would say yes for land. I would say the individual right to equitable access to natural resources, primarily in land and air and water. That be that I guess in the sort of I'm not sure. I haven't considered it in these terms, but in that sense, it'd be decommodified from where it is now, in the sense that people have property right claims based on government certificates of landholding that are entirely illegitimate, and society should say that those are illegitimate, and allow individuals to homestead or to claim that land, and in doing so open up a huge amount of economic opportunity for so many people in so many other ways, and
So
in a
yeah,
way that
you're for
if that individual access to land were respected, what you could end up with in the market is a kind of land-based, I hate to use the term UBI, but what we do you want an allowance, or do you want wealth to live off of? I think if everybody's claim to equitable natural resources, land in particular, were respected, that we would have much better systems where people could have passive income.
I mean, if you're arguing for the decommodification of basic human necessities like water, food, and housing, then I'm completely in favor of this. Now, you realize that this is
Hold on, not food and housing, just the natural resources that are the elements of that. So land and air and water, and access to trees and natural plants, and all of that. That is the basic human right foundation. Yes.
Okay,
and
but this is
create
nonsensical.
and to create housing from that.
So you can just take land and trees and air. What if you need like food? Like, does everyone need to build their own garden and like slaughter their own livestock in order for them to be able to survive?
Well, obviously not. In a system that I'm advocating, we can have incredibly complex systems of interaction and voluntary hierarchies. I'm not against voluntary hierarchies. And like I was getting back with my dome example, and I do have people I'm working with here on an under the table basis, obviously, and I'm just getting this business started. So I'm talking about it like it's an established thing. It's not really, but it still serves as a good example here. So if I want to trade my labor in making domes and custom building domes, I can do it here. But under the current system of corporatism, if I want to do it on a bigger scale, if I want to have employees, if I want to have a facility, if I want to have corporate accounts with, mail companies, things like that. I mean, for now, it's okay. I'm going to keep running my business sort of underground, but there are limitations that are imposed with that disadvantage me. And if you get rid of the corporatist policies, I would be more able, the disincentives that keep me from creating an above board business and having greater synergy and cooperation.
Okay, I don't care about how government regulations hurt the small business owner. I'm really talking about like large,
I
broad,
care
like, how does
about
this affect?
that.
I understand, but how about we get back to the actual thing that we're discussing? So my
Well,
fundamental.
so you accuse me of being divorced from the real world. I'm giving you personal business examples,
No,
and
my
homesteading
concern
examples,
is
and
making
road building examples, and you're saying get back to the
my
practicality.
concern because you just wander off. But I'm trying to bring us back. So on a
Because I'm
fundamental
grounded
level,
in the real world.
okay. So on a fundamental level, all right. I would like to build a society that works out best for the greatest number of people possible. That's what I consider to be an ethical society,
Likewise.
one which maximizes well-being. So you've just said, so I've explained that there are ways in which the deference of all resources to the forces of the market with no state interference can harm people. And you have made concessions, or I guess not necessarily concessions, if you believe in this, that there are certain things to which humans have a default right, that everyone should be able to like engage fundamentally with some basic countenances of the earth so that they aren't completely left to the whim of the business. We still
Right,
haven't gotten back to
equitable
the
access to
very
natural resources.
right. We still haven't gotten back to the very first question that I asked, though, which is if I'm just a regular dude in an ANCAP society, how is
Hmm.
my need to pay for shit to survive any less exploitative or coercive than sucking a person's dick for coconuts?
Well, that's like saying that nature coerces the first guy by saying if you want coconuts, you have to go gather them. This is going
What?
back to this. You raise this weird problem of, well, you have to work to get stuff. Like, yeah, that's life. Like, how are you?
Wait,
How is it
that's not
coercive?
an so you agree the coercive elements of capitalism could of capitalism would continue to exist even without a state? Because earlier you said that's not the case. You said it was the state that prevented people from being able to fairly negotiate their wages. But now you're
So here
conceding and
you're
saying that even
yeah.
without a
So
state,
here, right. So here you're imposing a, I have to say, false definition of coercion, where if you if want to do business with me, you have to give me a resume. I'm not coercing you to give me a resume. You choose to do that.
yeah, you choose
You
to
know,
suck the
and
guy's dick for coconuts. What do you mean? You choose to suck their dick. He doesn't have a gun. He doesn't force you. He doesn't hit you. You choose to suck your dick. You get down on your own knees. You unhinge your own jaw. You do the tongue work. That's your choice. That's voluntary.
it's not voluntary if you're accepting his illegitimate claim to property in the first place.
I think all of these are illegitimate claims to property. I'm a
But
socialist.
you're
I don't like
saying
private property.
right. You're saying, so you're saying that it's okay. What was the phrasing you used? That you have to work in order to enjoy basic quality of life stuff, right? That yeah, you could live off the land in your own land and fish in the stream, but if you want
Not
an
everyone can
iPhone and
do
a
that. Like
laptop, right? If
we
you
live in
right,
an
but if you want
industrialized society.
right,
We
and
like
if you want an iPhone, right? So your point is, if you want an iPhone and a laptop, you have to get a job where you
no,
make
no. If you
money,
want to
right?
live, especially in an ANCAP
Okay, if
society,
you want to
unless there's
live.
like a
Okay, so if
robust
you want,
UBI,
okay, so if you want food and shelter, I'll give you that. So if you want food and shelter, you have to work for it
food,
essentially, right?
shelter, entertainment, self-actualization, education, literally everything is gatekept behind money, like at a higher level in our society and would continue to be in your society, except apparently for access to like air, trees, and land, water. So
Right.
how
So
would that change?
because all of okay, because then all of those other things would be far more abundant overall. But how do you escape that in your society other than by saying we're going to create a system of coercive welfare? How are you going to eliminate this basic fact of life that yeah, if you want stuff, you have to do stuff to get it?
Because I don't think it's coercive to tax people. I think that taxing people is a necessary prerequisite to live in a civilized society. That some of the fundamental institutional and infrastructural things we take for granted literally cannot exist without taxation. I do believe that society can exist without the exploitation inherent to capitalist wage negotiation. And as a socialist, I'm trying to abolish the forms of exploitation that I think hurt people the most. I don't think that taxing people who have enough money to live so everyone can have roads, clean water, access to education. I don't think that's a bad thing. I do think enabling a system which allows a cabal of incredibly elite oligarchs to make as much money as they want off other people's labor because the average person has no way to negotiate their wage with a much more powerful institution, that to me is very, very bad. And I ask you again, what in an ANCAP society would prevent people from being subject to the exact same coercive forces that a current modern day middle class worker does?
Okay, I, I'm gonna come back to your question because I think first I have an opportunity to bridge the divide here, and that I think you would agree that if someone if you're going to live in a society with taxation, that people would have the right to secede, to create a new system, right? That they don't have to be part of that similar system. That you believe in that fluidity of borders of government. That if communities want to create their own system, that they should have that right. Yeah.
Well, I believe in democracy. I think people should be able to fight for systems they believe in, but I'll advocate for the one that I think is most ethical, whether or not people like it.
No. Let me put it to you this way. Like, so if California votes to secede, you would want the federal government to respect California's right to be an independent nation, right?
No, I don't give a fuck about states' rights over federal rights.
No, it's the individuals in that territory say we don't want to be part of this bigger system anymore.
Yeah, I don't really believe in people's right to secede from the government. I don't think there's generally like positive outcomes associated with that. If you could, I mean, if you could make like a really good claim, like maybe there's some like an ethnic group in
Okay.
California that's being genocided and they want to cut themselves off from and float off into the Pacific, then maybe sure, but it's something that like it'd be like a very extreme resort.
Okay, see, this is where I think the disgusting central planner nature of your worldview is revealed, because I would not force somebody into a system without their consent. I believe in consent. Consensual relationships are essential to a good society, to quality of life. If you remove consent from people and you say you have to be a part of the system, then they're being forced into something against their will. I reject that on its face. And if you say that there's going to be a tax in the system, I can work my head around it and say, if you can figure out a way for it to be voluntary, if there's a way that people can opt out and create their own system, if you have a right to be sovereign on your own land or for your community to be separate. But what you're saying is that because these lines are drawn on the map, we're going to force you to be a part of a centralized system based on your view of what a tax system should be. I'm okay with there being systems that people call a tax, if it's by a voluntary system, a voluntary association, if it's for a community. This is why I advocate localization, that governments get down to the community level, because a community is voluntary.
Wait, what are we talking about?
What you're advocating for is a rigid system where California is not allowed to secede. That's what you just said.
Because I don't care about the state of I don't care about the state of California. What are we talking about?
Yeah, you said the people. You said you don't care about the people either, and
Wait,
their
it depends
right
on
to
why
be
the
able
people want to leave.
secede.
I said, I said
So
if there's
you
a
don't.
human
Yeah.
rights
So then,
reason
but you're
to
saying
secede.
right. But you're saying they don't get to decide for themselves what that reason is. You're saying you get to decide.
Yeah, I believe in laws. Yes.
That the
Now,
majority can force its will on the
Let me
minority.
clarify
I
something
say if
because
that
you've been
minority wants to be,
hold on.
if someone want to be
You've been
separate
soapboxing
for
for like
whatever
15
reason.
minutes. So let me
Right.
clarify one thing, okay? In an anarchist
Has it been
society,
that long?
this is obviously not applicable because there would be no state. Anyone could do anything they want with regards to secession in an anarchist society because there's no state to secede from. I don't care about that. In our current society, right now, I don't think there's
Or
good
a
legal or moral
voluntary society.
justification. What?
Or a voluntary society.
There's no such thing as a voluntary society. Your society certainly isn't one because you still have the implicit coercion of capitalism. I don't know what exactly you're referring to. And by the way, you said you were going to answer my question, but you've pivoted away from it for the 18th time to talk about secession. How would a person living in an ANCAP society not be subject to the exact same coercive pressures a worker is in this society?
If you define coercive as you have to do stuff to get stuff, they would be. You have to cooperate with other people to have a society. You have to do stuff to get stuff. You have to have a society. Yes, I'm not rejecting that.
So you have to work to live. Yeah.
And I don't think your system, except for shifting that burden around and making it worse for everybody, really avoids that basic concept. I mean, even if you want to get on welfare,
I don't have an issue with work. I have an issue with two fundamental things. A, the hierarchy between the people who own the means of production and the people who have to work there. And B, the fact that you have to work to survive. That's a very big difference. If you're arguing that there's a social need to prioritize people working, yeah, of course, people need to work. Like,
okay,
we need
so
to keep the lights
I don't
on.
have a problem. I don't have a problem with the concept that you have to work to survive. I guess that.
Okay, so you believe in order to not die, you have to submit yourself to the authority of a capital owner. That's coercive.
No, you could garden, you could live off grid, you could live in a set. You're still working.
Oh yeah, sure. And on the island, you could just fish.
You still have to collect the coconuts. Yeah, yes, you still have to fish.
No, you don't. Wait. You don't have to collect the coconuts. If you want on the island, you can just walk off into the water and wait for the little fishies to gather around your feet and try to scoop them up.
Right. Okay.
But if you want the coconuts, you have to suck that guy's dick.
You still have. All right. I don't know why you keep going
What
back
you
to
realize what you're
the
arguing here, right?
fellatio here.
I'm trying to draw an equivacy here between the fundamental coercion of the aforementioned coconut dick sucking and of having to work in a society where all the means of production are already controlled by people much more powerful than you, infinitely more powerful than you. And your answer to this is, oh, well, you could just live off the land or form your own business. Okay, but can
No,
everyone do that? There are 8 billion people on this planet. Fundamentally,
you're
this is a system that requires most people submit to a hierarchy. To exist
see
within a
that.
hierarchy,
Yeah,
forced to
no.
survive, is coercive. There is coercion. There is exploitation in telling a person, you will work for us or you will die. You don't even get to control your own labor. You don't get to sell it equitably. You don't get to decide how it is used. You work for your local landlord. You work for your local feudal lord, or you fucking die. That's the system that you're advocating for. And you can call that system a lot of things, but voluntary is not one of them.
No, see, this is where you're using a deliberately confused definition of coercion in order to make an appeal to emotion. To say
That's a
that
really funny way of
that
not
that,
answering
that
my question for like the 20th time so far in this
I
conversation.
I answered your question the last time. I said, yeah, my system is going to maintain this basic fact of reality that
No, 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 no.
if you
This
want to eat a
coercion.
fish, you got to go catch a fish. If you want to have a society, you have to work with other people. If you want a modern industrialized society,
You're pivoting
you
again.
have to create systems.
Whoa,
Okay,
whoa,
so you
whoa,
keep
whoa.
using these
Statist?
rhetorical techniques.
Are you a statist? You're arguing that hierarchy and exploitation are necessary prerequisites for a society to function. I thought I was talking to an
No,
ANCAP.
organization, voluntary hierarchy and
Hierarchy.
organization.
Is it voluntary
Sure.
to suck the coconut man's dick? We've already been over this. You keep pivoting over and
No,
trying to
but
use
it's
definitions that are
vol
no
it's
longer
it
relevant.
it's yeah. If I mean if the guy with the coconuts takes one of those coconuts and he makes a pina colada for you and gets you drunk and you want to suck his dick for another pina colada, yeah, that's a fair exchange. I don't have a problem with that.
Wait. So let's be really clear. I don't know why you've like changed the analogy here. If you crash land on the aforementioned island and you have 2 options, okay? There's the coconut for one, that's great. But if there's a coconut man, okay, and they have all the coconuts, you can either suck their dick to live, or you can take a bet and hope you can fish well enough to survive, even with all the coconuts gone. You're saying this is a fine, equitable, decent societal form of organization.
No, because there should be. I mean, you're saying if in your new hypothetical, you show up on an island and there's a coconut man, and like he's got 3 coconuts, and those are the only coconuts on the island.
Say he's got
And you're
20.
saying
Maybe
that
there were a lot of coconuts. I don't know.
okay, so he's got all right, so he's got 20 coconuts, and I think we're both getting at how do we create a consistent societal framework that says he should share, right? Like that's kind of bullshit, right? And to me, the answer is equitable access to natural resources. It's not
Wait, but
like
you
you
can't
know
get around that. You can't get around that because the analogy that I'm using is meant to explain how there's not fundamentally any voluntary effort when you sell your labor to survive to a corporation. You can argue people have the right to homestead, but this doesn't really apply when we're talking about working for a modern industrial industry. In the modern industrial world, and especially in your society, you would have to work or die. Working means selling your labor to another because because there is literally a gun pointed to your head. You know, libertarians talk all the time about like jackbooted thugs from the state coming with a gun to your head to take away like a percentage of your taxes. You will literally die unless you sell your labor. That is not voluntary. That's
okay,
coercive.
so then stop evading my question and tell me how you've magically solved this problem and that taxation creates a magical fount of value that means we can live well and nobody has to work. Work becomes optional.
I would love to, yeah. So I don't actually think taxation is the way towards a prosperous society. It can provide some good things like roads and schools, and I believe in that. But I'm a market socialist, fundamentally, a libertarian socialist. I believe that there are forms of the market that are actually very effective and functional at meeting human needs. The problem, fundamentally, isn't the existence of the market with regards to how it treats human beings. The problem is the fact that those markets are owned by oligarchs, people who could privately own the means of production. I believe
I
every business
agree, and
should be
that's a
owned.
product of the state.
Well, I know they say that, but that's just factually wrong. Every society that hasn't had an overarching state authority to maintain like a consistent and singular monopoly on violence has always devolved into warlords. So, with that being said,
Right. So monarchies. So they've been
well,
worse forms of totalitarian government.
Well, I'm not advocating
monarchies.
for a monarchy here. That's why I'm advocating against you. I think you're functionally a feudalist. But with regards to me, my issue isn't necessarily with the businesses. My issue is the fact that they're owned by one guy or by a collection of guys. I want them to be owned collectively by everyone who works there. That way, people own the means of production that they produce. They have control over the way in which their labor is used. And what's more, they have a stake in the system that they need in order to survive. This would, of course, be used with a robust UBI or social welfare system to make sure that the disabled or people who can't work or can't sell their labor or people who are just feeling really bad that day can survive. But fundamentally, that's the change that I want to make. Abolish the hierarchy by flattening it. That's the real flat capitalism right there, making sure everyone collectively owns the means of production.
So I think that in what I'm advocating, there would actually be a huge shift in that direction, and it's really just a matter of how we get there. I think if you, and here I do see an opportunity to bridge the gap, because what I'm describing of localizing government control would actually get you the ability to create those economic systems at a community level where communities want that. Property can be reclaimed in the process of localization by communities that have been, as you have rightly pointed out, been enforced unfairly by the state.
Okay, how would the means of production be abolished in an ANCAP society?
It wouldn't.
Okay, that's what I want, though.
That's not evading your question. That's answering your question, okay?
No, I appreciate the answer. Just like we don't want the same thing. Then your society would still maintain this feudal hierarchy of warlords and rent seekers over the serfs. It's funny because in feudalism, serfs were guaranteed the exact thing you're advocating for: homesteading, access to the land.
No. So all of that would be, but so like, if we get government down, let's say we get rid of the federal government, we get rid of state governments, we get it down to the county governments, and now a corporation that owns an auto company or an auto plant even in your town says, we're based in New York, but we own this plant in Detroit. If Detroit goes independent, they can say, you know what? Fuck you. Fuck your illegitimate property claim. The people in this town built this. We're reclaiming it. And people here are going to create a new system of ownership.
So you do have an issue with an issue with business owners owning multiple businesses then.
No, it's not multiple businesses. It's having an unjust claim to those rights.
But what does it mean unjust? Like, what does that mean?
Backed up by the coercion of the state as opposed to the consent of society and natural
Okay, so
law.
wait, what if you have one businessman in an ANCAP society who owns like 40% of all the auto production in this country, and every single manager of all the individual auto plants all wants to maintain that hierarchy because they get a fuck ton of money paid down to them by that owner? Is this an illegitimate system of acquisition?
So, no, but that wouldn't happen in the first place. Now, here's where we get to
right now.
Right.
It's right now happening.
Right.
No, not based upon the state. No,
yes,
not based on the state.
On the dollar. It's all based on federal regulation.
This happened before modern capitalism. This happened before modern capitalism. This happened during the feudal days.
There was always a state or a monarchy.
No, even in stateless societies, even in Japan, back when there was no emperor and no shogunate.
Societies? When have there been? Because this is the most. Now I want to know.
I mean, Somalia is the big meme right now. Look at feudal Japan.
Exactly. Other than Somalia,
for centuries. Wait. Listen, I'm giving you an example. For centuries, feudal Japan had no central emperor or no central shogunate. For centuries, it was broken up into dozens of different clans, all of whom acted as independent feudal lords of the small areas over which they had control. With no central monopolization on violence, there was constant fighting and warfare. The serfs had absolutely no power and no way to leverage it, their authority, which they had none of, against their lords. Without any monopoly on violence, those warlords had like full right to do whatever they want within their own territory. This has happened before. Without a state, things don't just instantly become voluntary and non-coercive.
Those were just small states.
Then corporations are states. Then how are corporations not states?
Well, corporation is an entity that is created by government with special economic privileges. That's what I would describe.
Then what would you call a business in an ANCAP society?
just a business. It
Okay,
doesn't have
then
to be
why
a
then businesses
corporation
become
because
the
it's
new
not a unique
states?
legal entity.
A business owns everything in a town. They buy out everything. They can put their workers in those businesses, so it's a legitimate acquisition of property, and then they own that town. How is that not a state? It
If
just becomes a new government.
if it's a system that comes out of consent and people want
Wait,
that
no, you
system,
can't. No, you can't circumnavigate it.
Who
Oh,
are
so if people
you? No,
want
no.
to live in a
Who are
state,
you? Right. Yeah, exactly. Who are you to prevent? So, like I said at the beginning, if people
wait, so
even
if
want,
people want to live
a
in a state, it's
socialist
right to live in a
commune
state.
or an ethnic, if it's one that is formed voluntarily and they
That
consent to
doesn't
being a
mean
part of it, yes.
anything.
Do they consent? Absolutely.
Okay, wait. Then here's the question: why do you advocate
If
for what
it's
you do?
consensual,
The
if
people have
it's
clearly
yes,
said they
it's
want to
I'm
live in a state.
advocating for consent. If people right, and I'm saying that they should be able to have separate states based on their preferences so that government can become customized and transparent and accountable and eventually voluntary when the individual right to
How
secede
is
is
there
respected.
consent in every business in your town being bought out by a billionaire who you've never seen or talked with in your entire life? Can they just
So
vote
you
that
ask
person
these
doesn't have
you
any of
ask
those
these like
privileges?
big like
These are
emotional
very simple no, these aren't
questions
emotional. These are very simple
where
questions that illustrate how childlike your
you're
ideology is.
interrupting and you're raising your voice, so obviously you're getting emotional to a certain degree here. But when you're saying how is there not consent? Well, I mean, you're raising all of these complex false premises, like a billionaire
You just said it's
who is a
consensual. How is it
creation of the
consensual?
state. If everybody in the system consents to
Wait,
a
what does that mean to
system,
consent?
then it's consensual.
So everyone says, "Woohoo, we're okay with Walmart Incorporated owning every business in our town."
Right. If everybody in that town says that, then who are you in the next town over to use force to stop them from organizing their
I don't know what you're
community
talking
that
about the
way?
next town over. So what if the people in that town don't like that? What if they actually don't like the fact that all their shit is owned by like Walmart Incorporated? What if more than 50%
Then
of the town doesn't like that?
well then there wouldn't be consent.
Okay, so then what happens to those businesses?
Then they're not owned by Walmart, whoever created
No, they
them in the
still
first
are. They're
place.
still staffed by people on the payroll of Walmart. So what happens to them? Do we go in like militarily? Do we like bust down the doors? Do we like SWAT? Like, hey, we're reclaiming this for the people? Do we seize them? What happens? Who do they go to?
Actually, in a small sense, yes. And again, I think here's a bridging of the gap. I'm friends with a lot of libertarian socialists in the Libertarian Party, and I very much respect that they are not advocating for taxation. They are advocating for voluntary forms of socialism. And with my plan for the VA, for example, I'm a veteran myself with healthcare through the VA hospital here in Arizona. And veteran suicides is one of my big issues. I was given a handful of suicide pills when I went in and told them I was having trouble sleeping. And obviously, I think we would agree that the drug war is a disaster, right? Give
Yeah,
you
but
want
what
to
does that
respect
have
the
to do with what
individual
I
right.
asked?
Hold on. It's a bit of a sidebar, but I'll come back to it. So with the VA, what I want to see is the VA privatized and given to every single veteran in this country through an electronic voting system where every veteran gets one ownership voting share. So put the VA in the hands of veterans. And when I talked about this as privatizing, because to me, that's a direct individual ownership based on membership in a community that has a claim to a resource. My friend James Weeks, actually, who you probably know as the fat, naked dancing guy from the 2016 Libertarian National Convention, said that's socializing. And so, yes, at some point, I do believe that in localization, we can have a peaceful process of reclaiming some of the most egregious, illegitimate property rights claims created by government.
Okay, so how would you then take back that property of Walmart's?
I think a community could take over control and issue shares to everybody in that community if they wanted to.
So what
I
if a
wouldn't have a
large
problem with
enough
that.
community what if a large enough community decided that they didn't like the fact that businesses had control over basically every aspect of their industrial life, and they decided to
Yeah,
collectively form a sort of central government that they would then use to, if you want to do business within our territory, you have to abide by our laws. And it slowly
that's fine.
spreads to
Yeah,
replace the space of the continental United States, and then we just have America again.
I would hypothetically. I think it's unrealistic that it would go that way based on your premises. But I hypothetically, ethically, would not have a problem with that. But as you sweep through Arizona, can I stay sovereign on my own land? does every individual have that choice? If so, then cool. And that's really what
If
I
you get
want to
outvoted by
see.
your community.
That's fine. So I want to see a transition to that level of fluidity of government where the key basis is consent. Is the system being forced on you? If it's not being forced on you, I want people to create whatever systems they want.
Okay, so here's my follow-up question. If you believe it's just for a community to engage in retributive action against businesses that they feel don't have a legitimate claim to their stakes within a town, how exactly
Mm-hmm.
do you make sure that those people are able to appropriate their property? Walmart is very wealthy. They have security. They probably have a private army in
Sure.
your society.
Yeah. Sure. Well, okay. So, what was the term used there?
Reappropriate, to
Yeah.
reclaim.
So it's but you said retributive or something more. I'm sorry, what word I
Yeah,
forget
like
what
retributive.
word you
Like
said.
how do you get that
Retributive. Is
property
that
back?
what the word was?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
So I don't think it's retributive, if I'm using the word correctly, to say, sorry, the system by which you have a claim to this property is not legitimate, and we are reclaiming it for the people in this
What if they
community.
disagree? What if they
And
say it is
so,
legitimate?
right. So, in order to exist, Walmart has to have the consent of every community in which it exists in terms of people shopping there. If people
No, they
stop
don't.
shopping there,
Wait, feudal
if
feudal
people,
lords were hated by their serfs, but they still owned everything, so you had to buy through them. What do you mean? You don't have to like a business
right,
to buy from them. You form natural monopolies to keep people from having any alternatives.
right, and if it comes down to it, I don't have a problem with a community government essentially kicking out a corporate security and
But
saying
how?
no, we're reclaiming with police
Wait,
with a community-based police force. I would hope that it would be part of a voluntarily funded system, of a police system in a community where if the new sovereign says, "Hey, your corporate headquarters over in that other state don't give you claim to this building in this system here. We are reclaiming this." Then yeah, that
okay.
should happen.
What if
Absolutely.
Walmart shows up with more police? They're a multi-billion-dollar transnational corporation. Like they could probably afford like a massive army. What if they send
Right.
more
Well,
people?
that's essentially the system we have today with the state,
Wait,
and
wait,
I
wait.
think
No,
if
no, no.
this
You don't get to walk out of this one. What happens? Because we have plenty of examples throughout history of people who have tremendous moneyed interest in an area using that wealth to then break
yeah.
down any forms of resistance because it's more profitable for them to pay police and keep people quiet and subservient than it is for them to acquiesce to the will of the community.
Right, and you could point to the example of the Pinkertons as well, and there are plenty of examples of abuse of private security.
How is it
But
abuse of private security? Wait, because from Walmart's perspective, they're
mm,
violating the NAP. Walmart or whatever, whoever owns Walmart, owns those businesses. They paid for them. They paid the wages of everyone there. They paid for renovations. They did everything for this town. And then these town folk get uppity because they don't like the prices and they try to organize some community police to try and kick them out. With no central state to defer to, Walmart would just send in Pinkertons. They would send in strikebreakers. If they start storming the
right
stores, they would be legally able to, like, not that there is any law, but like they would be morally justified in gunning those people down.
now, that's kind of a sensationalist, unrealistic scenario.
Is
That
literally
as
happened before, even
hold
with the
on,
state protecting people.
yeah, but you know that even in those cases, the ultimate check is what can you convince a trigger puller to do? And I say this as someone who's been convinced to torture people in Iraq.
This has happened for
Um,
centuries. Lords would send knights in to kill peasant villagers if they didn't produce enough grain. The Pinkertons were used to strike break. This has been happening for centuries. Yeah, no, they will do
right,
it. People will kill if
right,
they're paid and told to do so. You know that.
right, and I would rather have the primary system by which that has been achieved, the state, taken down and held more accountable.
That's not an answer
If
to my
it's allowed.
question. You haven't given an argument for how any community could resist the will of the company.
It's not going to be perfect, but the example you're saying is just implausible because it would be
No, it's
such a
been
PR
happening.
nightmare.
No, it would.
Where
Wait,
has
who cares about a
Walmart?
PR nightmare?
Where have companies in modern America gunned down protesters or citizens reclaiming
there are
corporate
companies.
property.
Coca-Cola literally funded death squads in Latin America to make sure their slaves could continue producing the syrups at an appropriate rate. Nestle has gotten tens of thousands of African women hooked on formula just so their breast milk dries up, and then try to sell it back to them at a premium. Trust me, the American public doesn't give a fuck. Nobody gives a shit.
No, I agree.
Companies can do whatever they want.
Here's where I agree with you that not giving a fuck is a problem. Like I don't buy Coke. You know, I do my best to be a
These aren't
conscious
answers.
consumer.
People don't care. If they wanted, Walmart could just buy the news too. Lord knows they have the money. They don't have to run any stories on how they just gunned down 87 people.
So I've answered all your questions, and then you interrupt to say I'm not answering what I'm
because
just
your answer is that there's nothing a community could do to repel companies.
So what I'm getting at here is though that all of those problems are going to exist as long as consumers support companies doing bad things, as long as voters acquiesce to governments doing bad things.
This has nothing to do with government.
And now your interruptions are just getting tedious, man.
Because you're running off. I'm asking, you're okay then with the communities having no way of repelling the overreach of businesses? They would have no way of doing it. There's no evidence to suggest people are going to stop buying from Walmart because they killed people. This has happened plenty of times before. Nobody stopped buying from the factories that send Pinkertons to kill strikers. Like, that just doesn't happen. It's just not a thing humans do. Humans will always prioritize their immediate material comfort.
First of all, if you would have allowed me to finish instead of changing the subject 5 times as I was trying to get this point out.
I'm changing the subject?
Yeah, and now you're interrupting again for no reason. So if you want to look at all of the ills of violence and coercion created by corporations, when you want to talk about those direct cases of violence, I'm with you. They're horrendous. They shouldn't happen. As long as consumers are willing to buy from companies and give money to people who are going to use it to do violence, it's going to happen, regardless of what other system exists.
What, did you cut out or did you stop talking? Hello? Did I cut out?
No. Let me just see.
Okay, that's all right. I can wait. I'm very patient.
I think a short breather would be good, actually.
How are you doing, Tim?
All right. Could take. I'm not trying to dox you or nothing here, but you're in Cali, right?
No, actually, I'm in Washington now.
Oh, okay. Cool.
What do you ask?
Oh, well, I was gonna say everyone should take a quick breather, and I was wishing I could breathe something, but I can't in my state. But
oh yeah, well, we're the epicenter of COVID-19, so it's people are real scared up here. But we do have some of the cleanest air in the country, so we got that going for us.
Oh, I wasn't talking about air, but so I was actually kind of curious. Like, so I texted him. I don't know if
it was a weed joke. Okay, I get it. Okay, sorry. All right.
Yes. So I texted him. I don't know what's going on. I'll just wait for that. But yeah, I was actually kind of curious here, and if you don't mind if I just pick your mind.
Yeah, go for it. I get bored if I'm not talking anyway.
Okay. So it seemed to me like you guys actually. I wasn't sure. I wanted to get his thoughts on this, but it seemed to me like you're really purely a consequentialist on this. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm a hard consequentialist.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Oh shit!
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, I didn't touch anything. I just got dropped apparently. Where was I?
It happens. Discord shit. Welcome back.
So the dramatic conclusion there was, if you're going to make the argument from effect about the evils of corporations against the evils of government, you're going to lose every time. I'm not saying don't get rid of the evils of corporations, but the evils of government are far worse.
Well, wait, that's not what we've been talking about here. I'm an anarchist. Like, I'm not going to defend the excesses of the state. My reforms come fundamentally to reforming the economic system as it exists, not.
Oh, so wait, you're going to have you're an anarchist who advocates for coercive taxation. Tell me more.
Because as a transitionary period, yeah, I don't think we can just do anarchism today. I think you need to bring about certain material processes before we can get there. Like, for example, seizing the means of production. I think you need to implement worker democracy before you can make any meaningful change in that direction. I think that's very important. But we were talking about the fact that in your system, there's literally no way for a community to rise up and resist the poor behavior of a company.
Not at all. There are two important ways. I mean, you can physically reclaim property, and you can stop doing business with them.
Okay, but as we've discussed,
you would just be advocating that your version of a transitionary state do that. I mean, I guess maybe now we're coming down to a different, fundamental disagreement, is that you want to use more systems of coercive state to achieve your
we're pivoting
concept of
again.
anarchy.
We're pivoting
Of
again.
course.
We were talking about your system. So, for one, as we've already described, there
Pivots
is
are
no.
natural in a conversation.
I'm sorry.
Pivots are natural in a conversation.
I mean,
it's okay.
sometimes I just with regards to the with regards to like not doing business at these companies, like we know this doesn't happen. We've had centuries, in some cases millennia, of precedent to indicate that when there are coercive elements involved, as there absolutely are when it comes to which goods you purchase from a massive transnational conglomerate, stuff like PR doesn't actually affect outcome that much. Everyone knows Nestle is bad. Everyone knows Coca-Cola is bad. Everyone knows every company has done some horrible shady shit. Everyone knows, hey, all the banks currently are all like, they're all complicit in the horrible shit that they did back in 2008. We still use those products. We still use those services. There's no law against starting a new bank. There are credit unions. People can use an alternative.
I do my best to use Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and barter as much as possible.
And that's fine on your part, but people don't do that generally. And
right,
again,
and I'm saying let's raise everybody up and raise the consciousness. Not impose another system.
I'm arguing as a sociologist that it is a material fact that the bad PR produced by a company is not going to be a deterrent for them to do stuff that increases their profit motive. That's why we have the term banana republic.
Same with governments.
Okay, but we're talking about companies right now. And so the argument that you would just stop buying from a business that like kills a bunch of people in Milwaukee, that's not really a valid counter argument. That doesn't seem like an effective deterrent. And what's more, there's no way a community could ever muster the resources to materially resist a giant company. Maybe some smaller companies being shitty, sure. But if a company like Walmart or Amazon wants your town, the only way you're going to get through that without a state to defer to is through massive amounts of repellent violence. And there's no way they'll ever be able to muster that. And frankly, I don't like the idea of living in a society where every 2 years we have to have a revolution against Corporation Incorporated, so we can like take back our town's water supply because they've been dumping like goat feces in it, and it's been like giving everyone cancer. I think that having a state, a central authority with a monopoly on violence to defer to is actually a very important way of preventing some of the worst excesses of corporate behavior.
Okay. Are we allowed to pivot now?
I'd like it if you address that, because it seems like your society is just a feudal one. You can't resist who controls the means of production. You can't resist whoever controls your town. You work.
Well, I was going to address it, but you were going to interrupt and call it a pivot. So I wanted to make sure you're okay with me answering in the form of.
Yeah, well, if you address it, I wouldn't call it a pivot, but I'll try to hold my tongue.
You would anyway. You have. So yeah, what you're suggesting is that corporate power that only exists because of government would not have a check.
You have not described how any of this wouldn't take place without a government. You can't keep saying that. Why do you keep saying that? Nothing that I've said, you have not given me any reason why this couldn't happen without a government.
I mean, if you let me finish a thought, man.
So, okay, how would this not be an issue?
So the corporate power that you're saying is a threat would not exist without a state backing it up in the first place. And to what extent a localized system of government can back up a corporation is going to be limited to the consent of the people immediately affected by it. So the idea that you would have a corporation violating the sovereignty of another country backed up by a government, that would not be a thing. You would have a much better check on those abuses happening in the first place. I mean, I'm with you there that in the sense that we identify the same problem. but the understanding of it and its relation to the state is fundamentally different here. And I
Okay,
think,
so
again, it goes back to your definition of coercion and focused on money and materialism as opposed to ethics.
wait. I don't think you know what those words mean in this context. Everything that I'm talking about is fundamentally ethical. Materialism is just an analytical framework through which I
Taxation is
analyze
not
ethical
ethical.
decisions.
No, your
Okay, wait,
concept
you
of
haven't you haven't
a coercive
you
centralized
haven't
state
made
by
that
definition
argument.
is not ethical.
Okay,
You
you
said a
haven't made that
centralized
argument.
coercive state. You want a
Can you
centralized
explain to me how
coercive
you can
state.
justify can you explain to me how you can justify your belief that in an ANCAP society there would be no big companies?
I didn't say that.
Wait, then how would they not be able to do what I described, where they completely own a town and anytime you resist, they just kill you because there's no reason for them not to and there's no central authority to defer to?
Because you'd be able to immediately withdraw your consent.
Wait, what does that
Like,
mean?
yeah,
Okay,
it's
so what do you
possible.
mean
No, hold on.
withdraw your consent?
I'm not promising. Hey, I'm not promising like, hey, we get rid of the state or transition it all to, a voluntary system, that there aren't still going to be bad people occasionally doing
No.
bad
Your
things.
system is broken. It has nothing to do with bad people. You can't answer a simple question. How would you
No,
prevent
it fixes the
companies?
problem of institutionalized coercion.
Wait, how?
What I'm
Okay,
saying is
so
we
a
should not
company.
allow any system of institutionalized coercion. And what that comes down to is conscious consumerism, both as a material consumer and as a voter. And
So,
if you
so you're
say,
saying you
well,
can boycott
I'm
your
gonna
way out
do
of
business,
warlords?
if society as a whole, if the world as a whole is going to consent to Coca-Cola sending armies against people, then it doesn't matter if they consent to Coca-Cola or a government. We have to change the paradigm in both of those
Wait,
things.
no, because the
But all of
difference is
these
the government
phenomena
doesn't
of
just
all of
slaughter
these
entire
phenomena,
towns.
what?
I mean,
Governments
sometimes
have never
indigenous
slaughtered
towns.
entire no. What? No, governments have never slaughtered entire towns. Have you heard of this
Okay,
thing called
Let me let
war?
me let me
What?
clarify that.
Are you
Domestically, in the
kidding?
United
Like,
States of America.
really? What?
You can feign
Whoa.
outrage all you want. You can feign outrage all you want. But within the United States of America, how often does the US just send troops in to kill a bunch of strikers? Now
No,
they
but
did it back during they did
either
it
way
in
it exists.
coordination with
Right? Sure.
businesses. You pivoted
Either
like
way,
completely off of this
no,
point.
but
You realize that, right?
e- either way, the violence. And you're not going to win arguments just by interrupting, saying you're pivoting or
You
changing the
just interrupted
subject. When I
me.
make one sentence, I make like one sentence, and you say you try to attack me from a rhetorical
Okay, you're
perspective
making
of
an argument from
I'm
emotion.
pivoting
You're
or
trying to
changing
make
the
me feel
subject.
sorry for you, and I don't. Now let's get back to the actual question, which you have
No,
again not answered. You haven't answered
I'm
any
trying.
question. So again,
Right.
how
I'm trying to
exactly
ask you to
in an
stop wasting
ANCAP
people's
society,
time with meaningless interruptions
in an
and not
ANCAP
letting me get out more
society,
than two
would
sentences in a row
companies
half the
not
time.
be able to do what I
So
described? You can't answer it. You don't. There is no answer.
hypothetically they would, because hypothetically they would. I'm
Hypothetically,
saying
they
they
would what?
would.
Would what?
I'm not. They would
Would
be
what?
able to do that. They
That's
would.
bad.
Yes, right. And I'm not. I'm saying that we have to address that problem with conscious consumerism.
Okay,
If
that
people are
doesn't.
willing to give
You
money
can't just give.
and
Wait.
power
There is
to,
no evidence historically that conscious consumerism can resist the overwhelming oligarchical might of corporations. It doesn't seem to work. You can't advocate for a social system where corporations have effectively infinite power to monopolize industries within local areas and then resist militarily any incursions against them, and then say, well, if people just purchase things more responsibly, what if they don't? What if Walmart controls the media and doesn't publish stories about the
no,
bad shit since so nobody
everything.
knows outside of the
Right.
town? What if
Sure.
Walmart owns every food outlet in that area? What are you going to do? Drive to the next town to get food every time? At the end of the day, material comfort will always trump people's moral considerations when it comes to making purchases, unless you're talking about vegans or whatever. But not everyone's a vegan, and even they make plenty of irresponsible consumptive choices. Your society is a feudal one. You are advocating for a system where there is no way for the average person to resist the totalitarian might of companies that decide to lay claim in their towns and areas. There is no out for this. There's no conscious consumerism. There's no little, oh, well, we can just retract our consent. Nothing. You're arguing for a Mad Max style feudalist world where warlords operating as corporate benefactors control massive swaths of territory because it's more profitable than submitting to the democratic will of the people who all die conveniently enough to one shot to the head. There's no point for them to do anything else. And it's happened before. We've seen it happen in other countries. We've seen it happen in feudal countries. We've seen it happen in failed states. We've seen it happen in America. Our corporations going to other countries to do this shit to them because they didn't have a state strong enough to defend themselves against the interests of that corporation. States are needed to protect us from the comparably far worse excesses of corporations in a market-driven economy, so long as that state is democratic, which America, for all of its faults and issues, and there are many of those, is an ostensibly democratic country. And as much as I'm an anarchist, I would rather get rid of the capitalism and then get rid of the state than get rid of the state and then attempt to get rid of the exploitation inherent to capitalism.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Because that was beautiful, very, very well spoken.
Are you going to respond to any of it, or are you going to tell me about?
I believe I've addressed most of that already, but I will just underscore one more point here at the end, which again I think really is where we differ in our observation of reality. You see the evils of private corporate power today being worse than the evils of the state, and you point to various historical atrocities, which I don't deny the significance of. But I think you are grossly underestimating the relative violence and harm of governments throughout all of human history in creating wars and creating democide and creating widespread famine and human suffering at a scale that no even corporate entity with government powers backing it up has ever been able to achieve. And
but
what I'm
advocating
is, and what you are as a means of transition, and you're advocating for what I would describe, although you say it's not in your concept of tax, a form of coercion. And all of the times that we've seen in human history, entities with that power is that they have grown out of control and created the greatest examples of violence in the world today. And that if you take away that state power that backs up corporate power and make it subjected to market accountability, and the paradigm of society has to change to say, we will not, in our choices as individuals, support violence and coercion with our vote or with our dollars. And those things go hand in hand in the consciousness. In terms of social restructuring, if you want to address the greatest evil first, I don't know how you can see that the evils of corporations throughout human history, are even a drop in the bucket of bloodshed by governments that have killed hundreds of millions of people, literally. I don't know if the number's in the billions now, but in democide and in war and all the other ways that governments have destroyed life. And I think your emphasis here is hugely misplaced. I think if you reconsider the data, you would reorganize your priorities.
All right. So I need to point this out. For one, none of this has anything to do with the fact that I think it's funny you make an appeal to data when there is no data that indicates any of the claims like libertarians or ANCAPs make with regards to the mitigating effect a lack of government is going to have on corporations and the power they exert over others. You've advocated
I'm
effectively.
not claiming data on that point.
We're jumping really quick. You've advocated effectively for a feudal state. I consider this to be infinitely more regressive and more coercive than the one in which we live today. And I am anti-state. My problem ultimately is not with states or companies fundamentally, but with hierarchy. As an anarchist, I'm concerned when one man lays claim to dominion over another. That's just something that upsets me. I don't think that's right. I think we should all have an equal share in the world. But
can I pivot? Can I go
wait?
first?
But can I want to respond to your points. Then you can pivot. Okay. Wait. We'll take turns. So I'm against hierarchy fundamentally. Right now, our government is to an extent beholden to the interests of the people. It is a democracy. Now, is it a perfect one? No, God, no. Please, I criticize the U.S. all of the time, but I think a lot of people who act as though we don't live in a democracy forget just how bad governments were before we even pretended to have one. And what's more, many of the atrocities committed by government are usually done hand in hand with corporations. For example, the genocide of the Native Americans was done hand in hand with the railroad companies and with other corporations that managed.
Yes.
Right. They work together. And the reason for that isn't because government is super extra bad or because corporations are super extra bad. The reason is anytime you have a system which puts one man over another, which gives undue power to one over another, you are creating a system with the potential for tremendous exploitation and abuse. And as it stands right now, for all the faults of government, its existence does allow for things like workplace safety laws, OSHA, the ability to sue businesses for expropriating your wages or for committing wage theft, the ability to sue people for insider trading trading, the ability to call the cops if Walmart is sending their armed goons to your house to murder you because you wrote an article about them that said mean stuff. Fundamentally, the government does act as a counterbalance to corporate force. And that's because they have a mutually beneficial relationship. There are things both provides for the other, and these are stipulations that are made so we can live in a civilized society. And an approach towards ameliorating this difference cannot be as blith and as simplistic and as uncompromising as just abolishing the federal government and then letting corporations do whatever. We have to put the power in the hands of the people first, and then we can make moves forward.
So, to this idea of localization, I want to go back to that because you think that you're more likely to get what you want by reforming a centralized coercive system than getting it at the community level and showing some proof of concept why.
You're using a lot of loaded language there. What exactly do you mean by reinforcing a fundamentally coercive system? Do you have a problem with the government if it's perfectly democratic?
Well, I would say it's only democratic if it's voluntary. If it's voluntary, you have to have the right to secede on an individual or community basis and create new systems based on whatever you want.
What if everyone voted that they would rather live in an America where people can't secede? Because it turns out that leads to a lot of chaos and confusion and infighting.
I don't think the perspective of potential negative outcomes justifies an unethical coercive action. So if you say that I'm going to force you to be part, no, because if I'm in the minority and I didn't vote for it and I say I don't want to be part of that and I'm going to go be independent and I don't want to be in your system, you're going to force me to be a part of it.
So you think you should be able to murder if you want to?
I never said that. I don't know.
Well,
how
what
you
if
got
you
that,
believe
honestly.
that the state-imposed restriction on murdering other people, on your natural right to deprive others of their lives, is an imposition that you don't agree with? So you should be able to, as like a sovereign citizen, refute that law and kill people if you want.
I reject the premise of your question. You don't have a right to kill other people. That's absurd.
Well, why not?
Because people own themselves. You, as an individual human being, own yourself. Because that's the state of the natural. Well, if you define ownership as actual control, then the act of being an independent consciousness in your own physical body is in and of itself a state of ownership.
Wait, well, says Sue. What if the people of the government vote that that's actually not the case?
Says philosophy, says my perspective, says my beliefs.
Okay, so your perspective. All right, well, what if other people disagree? If we're deferring to democracy here, what if they believe that's not the case? What if they
I'm not defer. Hold on. You can defer to democracy, to majority rule. I do not. If you define it as rule by the people or voluntarism, sure. But if you're defining democracy as majority gets to force their will on the minority, no, I disagree. I'm not for that.
Wait, so then what rules could a democracy ever apply? Other than to those who voted yes for it? Should laws only apply to people who agree with those laws?
So a democracy, there are two definitions, and I would just ask you to say which you're using here, because democracy, by the meaning of the word, as is often used in flowery idealistic rhetoric, is rule by the people. But as an actual system of government, it's some concept of majority rule, whether it's by decentralized republic or representative democracy, what have you. It's ruled by the majority, gets to force their will on the minority without their consent.
So what is a voluntarily created law then? If you agree then that if a government is democratic in the sense that it represents the will of the people, that it's a voluntary system, what if they collectively then say, wow, all these sovereign citizens declaring their houses exempt from national adjudication and pointing guns out of their window is making me uncomfortable. I don't think people should be able to do that. What do you do then?
I don't think you should be able to violate someone else's right to live how they want because it makes you uncomfortable.
What if a person likes raping people? That's how they want to live. It makes me uncomfortable. Why do I get to stop that?
Yeah, well, you get to stop it because it's a violation of someone else's rights. It's a crime.
What if that
not
person
because it makes you don't not because it makes you uncomfortable. I don't get to stop you from punching me because the idea makes me uncomfortable. I get to stop you because you're violating another human's self-ownership, the integrity of their body and their person. You are committing a real crime.
What if the person who's being raped is in that sovereign citizen's house that has exempted themselves from the rule of the United States? What if you find out that most of the sovereign citizens who are declaring themselves exempt are actually just like abusive dads who want to be able to rape their children without the cops coming for them? What do you do then? After all, crimes only exist in a system with laws. If they're not part of the United States, they're just exempting
No,
themselves.
crimes exist under the concept of natural law, and I would support people going in and forcibly interfering in those situations and stopping that
You're
violation
okay
of
with
individual rights.
imperialism as long
Absolutely.
as you do. Wait, so I reject this idea of a natural law. Laws have to be codified
I
for them to
never
be
said
enforced.
imperialism. I never said imperialism. Like you keep
Wait, you're
jumping and
talking about
putting
the
words in
state
my mouth.
interfering with
I
the
didn't say the
behavior of
state.
an.
No.
Wait, then
Well, if
who
it
would
was,
go in?
well, it would be it could be a private security. It could be a community organization. If you want to call it the state, if it's a local community force that functions as a police force, then yeah, sure. I don't have a
So
problem with
how
that.
exactly are you a sovereign citizen if you're still subject to the laws of the government you just seceded from?
It's not subject to the laws of the government. Government doesn't say you can't rape people. Natural law
No, the
says you
government
can't rape
actually
people
does say
because
that. No,
no,
natural law. I
right, right,
promise you, before government, people were raping each other all the time, and nobody was getting arrested for it.
right. So it's
So the
still, but
government.
it's an actual it's an ethical violation. I have no problem with being held accountable for that, regardless of what words a government writes on paper. Rape is rape. It's wrong. It doesn't like
Wait, it
become
wasn't
more or
wrong
less
forever. Who
wrong.
decided it was wrong?
Logic, reason tells
Wait.
you
You can't
that
appeal to
that
natural
yes,
ethics.
yes, logic and reason tell you that because you own yourself, it is unethical to violate that self ownership.
No, but wait, that's your ethical principle. Nobody else, well, not everyone else believes
Yeah,
that.
and I'm saying more people should have ethical principles. I think the world would be a
Wait, we
better
do have
place
ethical
if more
principles, just not
people
yours.
examine. Well, yours, you have abandoned the concept of respect for private property or self ownership as an ethical principle in your advocacy for a transitionary system that is coercive by twisting the definition of taxation to say that
I don't think it's
it's
coercive.
by
We
consent.
keep pivoting. I don't know why you keep jumping to the fact that I believe in a transitionary state on the way to anarchism. That has nothing to do with this conversation. What I'm trying to like pull from you is that what if ultimately, see, I'm a consequentialist. I believe in utilitarianism. To me, whatever society hurts people is a bad one, and if it helps people, it's a good one. I don't care about like principal ideas or first order beliefs. I
Okay,
just care about the outcomes. So
I'm
what if it is
sorry, I'm an
decided?
ethicist. I believe in ethics and principles. I
Okay,
don't believe that
that's
I
fine.
can judge what's good. I don't believe that I have the ability to judge for everybody else or to be a central planner. You seem
Okay,
to have that conceit.
no. I mean, everyone has their own beliefs as to what's right or wrong. This is what I come at it with. There are people who would argue, in fact, that rape is not necessarily unethical. Up until
You're going
very
to decide
recently,
what's best for other people.
spousal rape wasn't illegal in many parts of the country, and many people didn't believe it was rape because by act of marrying a man, you are submitting yourself at all times to him. So obviously, there isn't like a natural law we can defer to here. People have had different ideas on what is or is not acceptable for pretty long periods of time. Now, with that being
Right,
said,
and it's
what if
getting better. It's getting better over time. By the way, it's
I
getting
agree
better.
with
I
that? Yeah,
encourage
no,
you.
I agree with
Yes,
that. But
Professor
what if
Steven Pinker.
I don't like Steven Pinker, but I do agree things are generally getting better with regard to our ethical
I love
considerations.
Steven Pinker.
What
I don't love
if
him personally, but I love the crux of his work
I'm
of
very pro gay
demonstrating
rights, so
nonviolent
even if you
violence.
did, it wouldn't bother me. But here's my question, and this is what I'm trying to get out of you. What if it was decided by the people who lived in a country and who voluntarily voted for it or whatever, and like 98% of them agreed individuals should not be able to secede from the union because it ends up creating bad outcomes? Because the people who do this tend to end up being really shady individuals who try to use it to get away with like bad shit in their house, where the police can't touch them.
Right. So I think I've addressed this before, but you've inspired slightly different wording for me here. When you say bad outcomes, does it justify doing something unethical, forcing someone into a coercive system? I say no. And what this comes down to is, again, what you pointed out is our fundamental difference. I believe in principles. You are a consequentialist. What you're
Wait,
saying is
consequentialists
the
believe in
ends,
principles.
right, in a difference. Well, you just, okay, the way you said it was
Yeah,
you
the
don't
ends
believe
do
in those
justify
first
the means. Yeah,
principles.
absolutely. I'll bite
Yes,
that bullet
yeah.
anytime. Yeah.
See, right. No, the ends do not justify the means.
Okay, but
Absolutely
we have
not.
different ethical principles, but I'm asking you a
Because
basic question
right.
on your values.
Okay.
I'm not asking you for you to conform to mine. I'm asking you, what would you do in a country where people voluntarily voted overwhelmingly in favor of preventing people from acting as sovereign citizens and declaring their own homes exempt from federal governance?
What would I do?
Yeah, what would you do if like the vast majority of Americans in an ethical democracy, a non, coercive one, if they all voted in favor of that, of keeping people from seceding?
Well, then it would be coercive because you're coercing people into the system. But I'm doing what I'm doing now. Like you say, what would I do? Like, well, I bought 10 acres that's pretty remote where I'm left alone as much as possible. And I can, at least by government, and I can have beautiful, vibrant, consensual relations out here. And, excuse me, minimize the impact of non-consensual relationships in my life.
So
That's
fundamentally,
what
your
I would do.
premise is a
I would assert.
democracy. Oh, sorry. Yeah, continue.
No, no, I would assert my rights as best I can, as I'm doing now. I think that's what everybody should do. And you have a right to not submit to taxation. If you don't like what your money is being spent on, you have a right to withhold it and say, no, I don't want
Then
to
you
be a
shouldn't
part of
be
that
able to
system.
walk on roads or use any public utilities or benefit from public
Right. If there's
education, right?
right, right. In a sense that if no, in a hypothetical sense, you're right. In a practical sense, no, because you've already paid into that, and there needs to be some practical transitionary system. And most people
Oh
who
wait, you can do
believe in,
wait,
hold
you
on,
can't do that. You can't defer to pragmatism. Are you telling me all the taxpayers who are okay paying their taxes have these leeches who think they can just exempt themselves from taxation, getting to use their roads, their sidewalks, their
yeah,
institutions?
yeah. Oh no, but that's people aren't people. That's not a realistic mentality. Most people think, hey, if I live in a town and I pay taxes in my town and my town builds infrastructure with this, when tourists come, I want them to be able to drive on our roads. I want tourists and friends and visitors and neighbors. We want to be good hosts. That's generally how human
But they
beings
pay
are.
taxes.
We want to share. Right.
But they pay sales tax. Okay, so I don't so we're operating like in a weird it's weird that you would appeal to pragmatism when you just like shit talked me for being consequentialist. You seem to think it's like exploitative to have to pay taxes, but it's not exploitative for people to be able to declare themselves exempt to taxes but still use the benefits of other people's taxes, which is really strange to me. Tourists bring money in other ways. Here's my killer question for you, okay? What would you do if we
Killer.
had an America that was voluntary democracy, okay? And you can
Mm-hmm.
secede. You are allowed to secede.
Mm-hmm.
However, not only are you allowed to benefit from any of the products of other people's taxation, you have to use your own infrastructure, your own utilities. There'd be like a card carrying thing you'd have to be able to benefit from using like taxpayer funded stuff. But businesses would not hire you because the government unfavorably taxes businesses that hire people who declare themselves sovereign citizens because it ends up making the government less money. So it's actually the
Right.
corporations who won't take you if you declare yourself a sovereign citizen. Is that a voluntary society?
I can't answer. I'm dead. I'm sorry. You killed me. Okay, so I would try to let me see if I can answer that in practical terms here, because that's kind of like already what I've done. If I declared myself sovereign and I had a passport for the Garden of Freedom, my independent nation here, would I be able to visit the rest of America like a tourist?
Um, I mean, tourists bring money in ways that you don't. You're sapping the system in a way that a tourist doesn't as well. Tourists are generally like an
No, like,
economic boom for the
well,
country.
no, no. Okay, hold on. Okay, as a visitor, like, am I able to come in and do business? Like, if I'm building domes on my own property, am I allowed to drive off of into the United States from
Well,
my sovereign land and sell my goods? Am I
what?
allowed to engage in
No, you
commerce?
no. Why would you be able to? You've exempted yourself from that. Now you can get another person to take your goods to market if you want to, but why would the
Oh, okay.
taxpayers allow you to walk on roads they paid for because you're too greedy to pay into a system that benefits everyone?
I don't think that's realistic because that's not how it works today. People are welcoming of anybody who wants to engage in good faith and observe the natural law and the standards of their
Any
community. And I would
anyone who
absolutely
exempts
do that.
themselves from taxes would be despised in a democratic society. Like you would be the scum of the earth. Everyone else is like spending a portion of their hard-earned money on trying to keep the basic foundational elements of society up, and you've just decided you're above all of that, and you're just going to like take advantage of everyone else's work while you get to keep your full paycheck. You people like you would be like reviled. You would be like the scum of the earth. At least tourists pay taxes in their home country too, and that pays dividends globally now that we have a globalized economy. But you wouldn't be paying taxes to anybody. You would just be sitting in your own house, completely exigent from society, beholden to no one, but no one is beholden to you. And if that's a
Well, no.
world that
So
you think is
in that,
voluntary,
no. Hold on. So in that sense, that person should be judged. So let's say we have a generally voluntary government where people all contribute to infrastructure and charity that's run by government. And there's one asshole on the side of town who just wants to be independent on his own property and run his business without paying taxes, and doesn't want to contribute materialistically other than in commerce. Then yeah, that guy should be looked at, and they still want to use all the infrastructure, and they should be looked at disfavorably, and people should generally take their business elsewhere if that's the case. But if that money that's being taken, it's not really voluntary. It's being used to fund war. It's being used to fund the drug war and the prison industrial complex. Then I'd say that person opting out is an ethical champion for not materially supporting this grossly unethical system. Now, if they have a social standard where the government is half and half, right? Like we have today. The government does half good things with our money and half really fucking evil things with our money. If someone opts out from, if it's simple as that, and I opt out and say, you know what, I'm going to do my best to stop paying taxes, but since everybody else is chipping in this 50% to do good stuff, I'm going to make sure that on my own, I'm living up to that social standard, and I'm I'm going to work with the food bank in my community. I'm going to start a charity, or I'm going to give blood, or I'm going to I'm going to do all these other things. Yeah, I think that standard of contribution should be upheld, and that people who contribute more should be held in higher regard, and people who don't contribute should be held in lower regard.
all right, then we agree. Then why don't we just keep the state, work on making it more democratic, and make sure that the laws it puts out are representative of the will of the population?
Because, well, I am then, and the crux of that is, how do you make it voluntary? How do you make
Wait,
it
no, you
consensual?
don't. You want to
I
abolish the
consent.
federal government.
Right, and keep state governments, and then county governments, and then city governments, and then voluntary community-based governments. That's how you transition to a voluntary system that's ethical, where government because power corrupts, and the centralization of government is a unique kind of power that creates a unique kind of separation from the will of the people. The more centralized the government is,
you just have a confederacy.
Right, hold on. Now, the more disparate communities are forced under a centralized government, the more corrupt, the less accountable, and the more of a one-size-fits-all solution is going to be forced on everybody. With power localized, decentralized, you have customization of government systems to the communities that they're supposed to be serving.
But then you're not arguing.
Transparent because there are less layers of bureaucracy. They're more accountable because you can have a system where the will of the people is immediately connected to that government system.
Okay, so you're not advocating for an ANCAP society. You're advocating for an increase in the number of states 50 times. If we get rid of the federal government and just defer everything to state government authority, we're just talking about 50 separate states that work together in a loose confederacy.
What I'm talking about is the individual right to secede being respected, and for individuals to come together. For individuals to come together and form new communities that provide better outcomes for themselves without forcing them into a non-consensual relationship with a centralized
You keep using these really loaded ethical terms, but there's no evidence to suggest that the absence of a federal government would allow people more opportunity to improve their lives. The last time we had a states' rights binge in this country, it was because they wanted to preserve slavery. That was the last time the states felt so strongly about an issue that they wanted to hop off and exert their own will.
That's actually not true. That's not true on so many levels. In
what way am I wrong?
There are multiple modern independence movements in many states. Hawaii.
There are no. Come on. Compared to the Confederacy, there are no independent states movements.
California now has Cal Exit. There's an independent California movement.
Nobody takes these seriously.
Nobody
takes these seriously.
Nobody
takes these seriously. Because they're in the early stages. They haven't gotten to the point.
Hold on a second, Adam, hold on 1 second. I just want to point out, because I know both of you guys got a tight time limit, and we got like 7 minutes left on here.
Thank you.
So just want to give you guys a heads up, so you guys can wrap it up without.
Let's go. No, that's great. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, you want to go to a closer, Vaush?
Yeah. Do you want to go at first, or
yeah? I'll give you the last word, man, because this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate this kind of conversation. I get to sit back in my rocking chair. I don't have to, do my hair or anything like that, or look into a camera and, make engaging facial expressions.
I just got
So
my hair up
yeah.
in a ponytail too.
So this is a different kind of conversation. I really genuinely appreciate this. I think a lot of people coming at what you and I are coming at intellectually have to answer a lot of these questions. I think I've gone through a lot of the processes that you've gone through in at least what I understand from this conversation and what I've read and seen of your work in the past is that you've gone through identifying with different ideologies. And I think we're both really motivated to look at the big picture and answer big questions about social organization. And I think more conversations like this should be happening. I think this is really cool. I kind of wish we could do this in person. Really, the ideal format would be you and me at a table, with a camera, video, where we're having the conversation directly and get all the nonverbal everything as part of it. But I think the core distinctions have come out here in a fun and relatively friendly, respectful way, where we see the difference between, what I present as an ethical system first, or putting ethics and principles first, as opposed to the argument from outcomes that Vaush puts out here. And I think this has been a great way for anybody listening to decide for themselves and see what they come down on. I'm just glad that Tim, that you put this together, and for everybody who's tuned in and listening, that they're a part of this and they're considering their worldview at a deeper level. And I would just say, please, keep asking hard questions, keep challenging yourself, and keep developing a better worldview by having some role in this conversation, whether it's listening into debates like this or reading, deep intellectual thinkers. My website, speaking of which, my website is thefreedomline.com. You can get my book there for free in every digital format. You can find my libertarian presidential campaign through there, thefreedomline.com. And gentlemen, to both of you, thank you very much for making this happen.
Yeah, and I'll take it away. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Obviously, things always get heated during discussions, but I tremendously enjoy conversations like these. I find them a lot more fun and interesting than having protracted conversations with institutionalists like neoliberals who are only interested in arguing like the blandest and most committee like approved positions. So that's good. And I mean, I took a look at your work prior to speaking with you as well, which I think is fairly, reasonable prereq. And I really, as much as I disagree, I think, with some of your broader policy prescriptions and some of your broader ideas, I really do respect a lot of the work that you do. I can see very clearly, I mean, you've been an active advocate against the Iraq War, a pro-free speech advocate. And what I think is most important to me, most of the libertarians that I've argued with are just Nazis who are dog whistling. This seems to happen every time I talk with one of them. Every single time I begin with them arguing that like businesses are impeding corporations, and I end with like hearing about how capitalism would be good if it weren't for the neoliberal Jewish, conglomerate suppressing the white man. But you don't. You actually believe what you talk about. Like from everything that I've seen from you all across the board, you consistently believe in the things that you actually advocate for. And while I'm not saying that not being a Nazi is a high bar to cross, I do think that being intellectually and ideologically consistent is a very good thing, and I respect it a lot.
Thank you.
I also respect you putting your work out for free, the book that you've done. So thank you very much for speaking to me. I really do appreciate it. And I wish you luck in your run.
Appreciate that. All right.
Yeah. Thanks,
Beautiful.
guys. Really appreciate you guys coming on. This has been fun. Obviously covered a lot here. Always love having you guys on. Have had both of you guys on a few times, and it's always been great. Just to make sure I don't miss anything here, I've got your YouTube channels and the Freedom Line for Adam. Vaush, are you on D Live now?
No, I'm happy to say that I've gotten back to YouTube. The copyright strike issue I had. Yeah,
Okay.
Speaking of unethical appropriation of speaking of an unethical union of business and state interests, let me tell you. I'm back on YouTube, thankfully. Just Vaush.
Okay, so if anyone is interested, if you guys aren't familiar with these guys, I'm gonna have their YouTube channels up in announcements. You can go check them out. Please do actually. Obviously, both great guys. Really appreciate you guys coming on. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, both of you, Kokesh, Tim.
Peace and love, y'all.
You too, guys. All right. So for everyone that's been listening in, hope you guys